when I talk with people, people is gonna typically say, no, I don't like this. And sometimes you don't like it because you don't know how it works. And that applies to everything. It applies for math, applies for chemistry, applies for music. If you don't know how to do it, the easy excuse is I don't like it. So I have the feeling like as more people becomes more familiar with the feed industry, either like through online classes or through like this podcast, hopefully we are going to have more professionals in the feed industry in years to come.
This is the Feed Science Podcast. My name is Adam Fahrenholz, and on behalf of everybody that is involved in this new venture that we are taking on, I want to say thank you for joining us, and this is our first episode. And so we thought, as our very first episode, one of the best things that we could probably do for everybody in the audience was to introduce ourselves as hosts and co-hosts. We'll most likely be doing these podcasts not too often as co-hosts, but there'll be multiple hosts doing the work. And so in addition to myself, I'm joined today by Dr. Wilmer Pacheco, who is going to be the other host of podcasts as we release them. And like I said, we thought that a good way to start would be to interview each other, introduce ourselves, give the audience a background of exactly our path to coming to this strange world of feed milling in an academic sense. It's a rare kind of group of people that decided to do this for a living. And so we thought we'd share a little bit about ourselves. So with that, hey, Wilmer, how are you doing?
Doing good. How are you, Adam?
Doing well. I'm excited to see kind of how this all grows. I think it should be a lot of fun. I've talked to a few different people about their interest in joining and being on the podcast, and I think it'll give us a fun space to have some conversations that other people don't necessarily get to have, learn a little bit about the industry, some of the science, but also, some of the fun stories and things that are out there. I was having a conversation actually with one of my graduate students, and he's kind of said, well, who's going to listen to that, right? And I said, well, I don't know. People seem to like driving in their cars on the way to work, listening to, real crime and all other kinds of strange podcasts. So why not one on feed milling? Maybe we can make it fun and entertaining. So I'm hoping that's something that we can do, and maybe some folks can learn a little bit about, what it is that we are. So like I mentioned, I think a great place to start is to have a conversation here for just a little while and introduce ourselves and kind of what we do, but also how we got here. So I'll act as the interviewer here from the start, and I'll interview you, and I'll ask you, describe what your current position is, but then also, if you wouldn't mind, give the folks an idea of how you got from wherever you decided to start kind of hitting this agricultural space to teaching about poultry nutrition, feed milling, and all the like there at Auburn.
Yeah, I mean, I think in my case has been an accident, Adam, just because I'm from a very rural area in Honduras, and like I grew up, planting corn and beans. But one of the things that I was sure about when I was 15 years old was that I didn't want to stay in my hometown for too long because there were not a lot of opportunities. There was no university. So the only opportunity that I got to go to high school to San Pedro Sula was to join a technical center, and that's a collaboration between the government of Honduras and the government of Germany. And in this center, I study, maintenance, and I learned how to make pieces of machines, and then I learned to do like preventive and corrective maintenance. And at that point, my goal was to finish, high school, and then work during the day in San Pedro Sula, and then study during the night. Like I was thinking, mechanical engineering. But then when I was finishing the high school, one of my sister-in-law spoke about like Zamorano University, and she encouraged me to do like the admission test. So I did it, and I got a scholarship to study at Zamorano. And one of my brother was really mad with me because he told me like why I wanted to study agriculture if I was like in a technical career. So I had to convince him, and I went to Zamorano. And then in Zamorano, I was focused on milk processing. So I was just working in make cheese, yogurt, working with juice processing. And then in the last year of Zamorano, I had the opportunity to interview with Smithfield Foods because they had like a manager trainee program in feed milling. I think that I had seen only like a mixer in Zamorano, but no other equipment in the feed industry. And they invited me to be part of the manager training program in Laurinburg in North Carolina. And it was really interesting because the knowledge that I had, like the technical knowledge that I got during the high school, plus the knowledge in agriculture that I got from Zamorano, helped me out to understand, like the process and the nutrition. And I was one year in the manager training program, and then I became the night shift supervisor. And I was working from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. So I quickly realized this is not what I want to do all my life. And so I did the like the TOEFL exam, which is a requirement to apply to grad school in the U.S. And then I was accepted in the poultry science department in NC State. During the master, I was working with a soybean processing and just looking trypsin inhibitors and looking, like different particle size of soybean meal to increase the tolerance of the birds to trypsin inhibitors. And then when I was finishing the master program, Dr. Charles Stark offered me the PhD. He was my main advisor during the master. So I did the PhD, but during the PhD, I focused more like in nutrition and physiology, working with DDES. And when I left North Carolina, I felt like I was very blessed because I had the opportunity to work in feed processing. Then I had a good understanding of soybean meal processing and then DDES. So I had like a good understanding of some of the major ingredients that we use in poultry feeding. And then in March 2015, Auburn University had a position open, and I applied and I got the position. And the idea here in Auburn at the beginning was to do a lot of feed milling work, but then as as my graduate program increased, then now I'm doing more research with nutrition. I still do like a lot of work with feed milling, but I work a lot with additives, and has been a really good experience. I always say that I could only have like a better job than this, that will be to be a soccer player, but I think I'm getting too old for that. So I'm really happy with with what I do. I have the opportunity to interact with the industry here in the U.S. and in several countries, which I think is good because when you look the industry, the same problems repeat all of over and over in different places. And when you see a problem in a place, it's easier to correct it in another place. So has been a really good experience. What about you, Adam?
Yeah, so I'm gonna add kind of one thing to your story there, just because I think this gets interesting from the small world aspect. So you mentioned Stark, and being your master's, and then you did your PhD there with Charles and also Dr. Brake as here as well. But Charles would have also been, I suppose, probably the director of feed manufacturing in Smithfield by the time you came up, right?
Yeah, and it's something that probably I have to share was that when I was at Zamorano, I didn't speak any English. You take English classes, and but I was, English was not as important for me. I was just more focused on the other classes. And then when Smithfield went to Zamorano, they told me that I needed to speak English to work in a feed mill. And one of the ladies in human resources in Zamorano, she said, "Don't worry, I'm gonna train you how to like do an interview." And I remember the first time that I went to her office, she said, "Are you ready?" I said, "Yeah." And her first question was, "Why should I hire you?" And I didn't know what she was talking about. And and then I went to the interview, and yes, Dr. Stark was the director of production at Smithfield. And I thought that he was going to ask me those standard questions in an interview, right? And I was kind of prepared to answer those questions. But like I still remember that some of the questions that he asked me was, why do you think that you need to start from the bottom when you work in a company? And I really enjoyed that interview with him. And I would say he was probably the person that took the decision to bring me from Honduras to Smithfield without having any experience in feed processing and without speaking English. So, yeah. And then
Yeah.
he was the one that offered me the opportunity to go to North Carolina State as well.
Yep. So as I said, I'll start my journey, and we're gonna tie that all somewhere together. So you kind of said that your entry into the feed industry was an accident, right? Which I think is probably true for the vast majority of people that end up in it, right? The vast majority of people end up somehow, I don't know how I ended up here. It wasn't something I knew anything about, but I've really fallen in love with it or whatever. My story is a little bit more nature versus nurture kind of a question. So I was born in the mid 80s in Manhattan, Kansas State University. And at the time, my mother had just finished vet school, and my father was a graduate student in the Department of Brain Science at Kansas State University under the direction of Keith Benke at the time. And he was a graduate student, a master's student, a PhD, and then kind of a research associate type of position until we left there in the early 90s when he took a job with what was then SmithKline Beecham Animal Health, then became Pfizer Animal Health, then became Fiber Animal Health. There will probably be people listening to the podcast that will recognize the name Charlie Fahrenholz because I go everywhere, and which is great. It's something I actually really love. So I don't know the first time I was in a feed mill. I can assure you it was well under a year of age. I can also think I can probably assure you it was in some sort of violation of OSHA regulations and a number of other things. There are pictures of me as a very small child driving a forklift with the then feed mill manager there. So there's a question about, in my mind always, did I end up in feed milling because it was the right fit, or was there something in the water or whatever? So we left Manhattan, went to Pennsylvania for a few years, came back. I went to high school on the Kansas City, but Missouri side of Kansas City. And, we are a big K-State fan. Both my parents have, my father has 2 advanced degrees from there. My mother has her veterinary degree from there. I was born in Manhattan, always a huge fan of Kansas State. So when it came time to pick a school, that was on the short list. Ended up going and ended up choosing feed science and management as my bachelor's degree. And I think the reason it may have been to some extent, this is kind of what I knew, but I think a lot of it also had to do with, I grew up always around animal agriculture in some way. We've always had horses ever since, I was born. I'm sure I was on a horse before it was safe to do so as well. And so always was around that, but then always adjacent to the rest of animal agriculture too. But I've figured out through high school that, I liked a little bit of chemistry, but I wasn't going to be a chemist. And I liked biology, but I wasn't going to be a biologist or a nutritionist or something like that. I thought about maybe being a veterinarian. My mother kind of forbade me from pursuing that as a choice, which is probably a good thing. At the time, I don't think that would have been a good fit for me. I married one anyway. So I continue to live some part of the veterinary lifestyle. And I think the reason that feed manufacturing, feed milling ended up being such a good fit for me to do was kind of like what you did by accident, where it was, I like a little bit of nutrition. I like some machinery. But I'm not going to be an engineer. I'm not going to be but you know what does a little bit of all of them? This one job. Like, this is a very unique thing that one day might be dealing with some formulation and some chemistry and some biology and trying to understand. And the other day might be turning a wrench to fix a piece of equipment and figuring out how to make something, work when it wasn't before. So with that, I went and did my bachelor's in feed science and management. Kind of went and assumed most likely I'm going to go do feed mill manager or something like that. I didn't actually have to do the night shift stuff. We had a really good program at the time at Kansas State of what was called the Feed Science Advisory Board, where we'd have folks come in and talk to us about kind of their industry and all these other things. And I heard enough stories to realize, like, so get called at 3 a.m. because I'm the manager because something horrible has happened, and have to, I still thought I was going to live in the Midwest the rest of my life, and have to go out. It's probably December and freezing cold and deal with it. It's like, no, that doesn't, I don't know that I want to do that. So I decided, you know what, let me go ahead and stay and do my master's, and stay and do my master's like you turned into stay and do my PhD. And I also worked on distillers grains on my master's, looked at how you could potentially pellet and then break down distillers grains and how that would work in finished feeds. And on my PhD, just like broke down pelleting as far as I could go, and looked at all kinds of different things that impacted pellet mill and the pellets themselves. And I measured a couple of thousand, it was maybe a couple thousand pellets with the Instron to determine, elasticity force and all things I wouldn't wish on anybody. I don't know how many PDI tests I did, particle size tests I did. You've done more particle size tests at this point than I have. I can guarantee you that, based on the work you guys have been doing. But, decided that I really liked that, but I still didn't quite know what I wanted to do. So I also ended up talking to Stark. And Stark had known me since I was a little kid, because he came into the feed science world as a graduate student for a couple years, right when my father, and for those that might be listening that also know a guy by the name of Kim Koch from the Northern Crops Institute, they were kind of all there together at one time. And so I'd known Charles for a really, really long time. And, he and my father had been friends and kept in touch. And so I reached out to him and said, hey, before I decide on what I want to do, a lot of what we focus on at Kansas State has had to do with kind of the commercial side of things. I'd like to get some experience on the integrated side of feed manufacturing, get some exposure to it, and then that might help me make my decision what I want to do. So he invited me to come to NC State as what we called a postdoc position, because he had to call it something. So I came to NC State, and that would have been 2012, and worked on some projects with him, but then got the opportunity to go out and spend some time in the integrated feed world while working on those projects and learn about it. Lo and behold, late in 2012, it became necessary to hire a faculty member to run the program at Kansas State, to run the program in grain science. They pursued Stark. He took some time to think about it and some convincing, I think, but he eventually said yes. And he asked me if he left here and they asked me to apply for the position, would I? And I thought about it and talked with my wife about it and decided, I kind of like this academic side. They ended up opening a position. I applied, went through the interview process. They gave me the job, and I was on faculty in November of 2013. So, being here was never exactly the design, but I assumed I'd be in a feed mill somewhere. It's still my favorite place to be. But academia wasn't necessarily a part of the goal, but it's how we ended up here. But I do find it interesting that all of those things considered, that now I look at, okay, there's a lot of feed milling work going on and at different places. But you guys do quite a bit there at Auburn, and we're doing ours here at NC State, and we've got Charles there at K-State, and now there's some other places that are doing things as well as as well as some other animal science and poultry science departments that have long done work on the feed milling side as it relates to nutrition. But in reality, the world's really small. Like there's not that many of us, and we all have some sort of connection. And I think it's really interesting and kind of fun. So it's interesting how all the paths kind of converge and diverge and then converge again and that sort of thing. So
That's true. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So that's my story on kind of how I got here.
Yeah, I mean, we were at NC State for like around 2 years there together, right?
Yeah. So I got here in 2012.
I graduated in 2014.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, it was there for a little while. The good old days of Dr. Brake's lab group and all that.
The
Everything that
meetings
went into
on Friday at 3 p.m.
Friday at 3 p.m. meetings, just to I think to make sure we were ready for the week ahead, but also to kind of teach everybody that the work week's not over until the work week's over. You know, you gotta work the whole week long. So yeah, I would still talk about that with people fondly. I remember it fondly. I'm not sure how fondly we all thought of it at the moment, but I think back and I think about it.
I honestly think that was like a really good idea because we knew like Dr. Brake was always busy and he always had like that, hour and a half to 2 hours to meet with us. And I had the feeling that when I was defending the dissertation, it was very helpful because a lot of the questions that I was asked during the defense, he asked me like multiple times. And one thing that I always like enjoy was that if I got distracted, he could pick it up really quick, and he would say, "Right, Wilmer," or
Yeah.
"Right, JT," and
Yeah.
he knew when you were distracted in those meetings, and that was really good.
No, he had a gift for that, and I think it's and I think you can tell also with faculty in particular, kind of who their mentors were, and and I'm like you, I think a lot about the way that Keith Benke did things with me, and the way then that I learned from Brake, and the way that I learned from Charles, and think, okay, these were the things that they did that they didn't have to do, but that were really beneficial for student, things like teaching in the moment, right? Where it's like, no, it's not all in the classroom. How many, and I know sometimes my staff hates me for it, but something will happen in the feed mill, and instead of just we just fix it or we move on, it's like, no, everybody come gather around, this happened, let me show you why, let me show you how this particular bearing is supposed to come apart, or the pellet mill plugged, and let's go look specifically what happened here. And that's something I think I took from all three of like those guys, was this idea of don't waste the opportunity to teach something, because you don't know the next time it's going to present itself. Take the 5 minutes and explain what happened and why. And I love, I tell people, when we talk about teaching, I like teaching. I like the dissemination of knowledge. I'm not the most gifted classroom instructor. I've seen really gifted classroom instructors, and I know I'm not one of those, and that I have to work at being good in the classroom. But out in the field, like out in the mill, and I'm sure this is true for you as well, because I've seen you do it in the mill or in the poultry barn. I love the opportunity to say, oh, here's something cool that maybe you haven't seen before. Everybody come over here. Let me show you this. That I find that so much fun. I whether it be with students or it be when you're out on like a consulting or an extension trip, and sometimes you think to yourself, right, like, I'm probably telling these guys have been in the industry a long time. I'm probably telling them something that they already know. I don't want to, I don't want to sit there and make them look at me like, okay, university boy, like, yeah, I know. And then you find out that it's like, oh, we never thought about it that way. And while I'm at the feed mill, they've taught me something that I've never thought about that way. And I'm like, oh, wow, that's a really interesting point. I'm taking notes. That's going in my next lecture on grinding, because I'd never even considered that before. That's so much fun. And that's one of the things I love about doing this from the academic side is that opportunity to explore and learn on a constant basis, and then give that to somebody else, whoever it is.
That's correct. Like the other thing that I feel like I learned a lot when I was at NC State, because Stark, Ferkit, and Break were like my main advisors. And I remember Ferkit always told me, you are gonna become your advisor. So I think I'm a combination of all the three. But one thing that I learned is like they always saw the student as colleagues. They never saw the students as students, because in reality, I mean, being a grad student is just like a small fraction of all your professional careers. The students are going to graduate, and then they are going to be working with you either directly or indirectly. And I really like that they always saw the team as colleagues. Of course, we have to have the respect for them, and sometimes they can see things that we cannot see. But I'm sure that you and I, we are treating our grad students or undergrad students the same way.
Yep. Well, I mean, and so it's another part of the small world, right? Because at this point now, we've shared one where my most recently graduated PhD, Andrea Rubio, was your master's, and before that, she was at Zamorano, and it's fun to kind of continue that cycle, right? But you're absolutely right. When you get a really good graduate student like that, and you kind of like, oh, this is someone I can work with. I'm also a mentor, and I'm teaching, and I need to make sure that I'm maintaining that relationship, and that's, I think, if you put the work into it, easy to do professionally, but also realizing that no, this is this person got here because they've got something to bring to the table. They've got some intelligence. They're probably thinking of things in a way that I haven't thought of before, and so there's that feedback, and there's a way to make it both professional and fun and everything all at the same time. You can really tell. I whenever you get around somebody and they talk about their advisor, and they're 30 years into their career and they still talk about their advisor, or I can hear you doing it in just the way that you're saying the names, and I'm the same way. It's yeah, I've got that degree now, and technically I suppose that makes us equals. I mean, heck, I'm a faculty member too, and there's certain people I'm never calling by their first name. Like I can't come out of my mouth that way, right? It's like, no, sorry, you're always Dr. whatever to me. And that's, but it's funny how often, I don't know if you've experienced this, but there's like folks even like out in the industry, and they'll refer to me that way, refer me to Doc, or, Dr. Friend. I'm looking at him going, you've been doing this for 45 years. Why are you being formal with me? Like I'm the new guy here learning from you. And that's always a little shocking. And you forget like, oh, I guess I've been around longer than I thought.
You know what I tell them, Adam, is if you forget my name, you can call me doctor. That's the only reason, because it will be easier. But otherwise, just just call me by my name.
Yep. Yeah, I've always kind of thought of that in the same way. It's a interesting and fun place to work. In the industry in general, right? I love the opportunity, kind of as we discussed, to any one day could be, I laugh about it in this context of, end of the day, and I go pick up the kids from school, preschool, my three, and it's like, I often wonder that if these people don't look at me and wonder because there are days where I'm getting out of the car and I'm in suit and tie, like I'm to the nines, like just because that was a day where I had a meeting with particular stakeholders, or the dean and the department head of there was some very important meeting I had to be. And there's other days I get out and I look exhausted and I'm covered in all manner of feed and grease, and I'm in my jeans and my t-shirt, and they look at me and go, no, nobody can have a job that encompasses both of these things. And it's like, well, I do, and it's awesome. It's a lot of fun.
Well, and I think the other nice thing when you were talking about like the feed industry and how more programs. We are having more programs in other universities. I think that's really good, because even this means like the that feed is very important. We know like it represents more than 70% sometimes of the total cost. And when I came to the US 15 years ago, I had the feeling like, the feed mill we always look at it as a cost center.
Yeah.
Now companies are just putting more money into, the feed industry because they can put like $1 in improving, a process, but then they can save $2. Um, so it's really interesting, and like you're saying, it's an industry that you do something different every day, and that's what I miss a lot about like working in the night shift, because there were some nights that nothing was going on, everything was running smoothly. There were other nights that I was just waiting for the boss to arrive and say bye, just
Yeah.
go home and then go to sleep,
Yeah.
because you probably, I mean, we were working for like 8 or 9 hours in one night just trying to fix something.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
I, I think it's a good place to be.
Yeah. Yeah. No, like I said, I never got to do it from the or had to do it. This depends on your perspective from the standpoint of the industry. But I started working in the feed mill at K-State, the university feed mill so it would have been 2003. I had walked into Banky's office and said, "Look, I'm a freshman. I'm kind of a little bored. I would like something to do. All through high school, I always had a job, all this other kind of stuff. What could I do?" And he said, "Would you like to work in the mill?" I said, "Absolutely. I'd love to work in the mill. It's kind of why I'm here." And he walked me down and introduced me to a guy by the name of Nate Bingaman. Nate was a senior at the time, and he was like, "Nate, this is Adam. Adam's going to be working with you starting tomorrow." I'm like, okay, cool. And I think it was maybe 2 days later, Nate told me, he's like, "So, tomorrow morning we got to get this steam flaker up and running at about 6 o'clock in the morning. Because we got to actually be on trial by 8. He's like, "But I'm not going to be here. I've got something, and I won't be here first thing in the morning. So you come in and you work with the other guy here and get it up and running." And I'm going, I just started working here, and I'm also not someone like, I'm not a junior or a senior who's taken all the feed milling classes yet either, and it was sink or swim, push the button. What's the worst that can happen kind of a situation? And of course, in the feed mill, there are some worse things. There are some bad things that can happen, but as long as you're being safe, it's figure it out. And I think that's kind of where I even more kind of fell in love with the idea of, it's just like, nah, figure it out. And then, I'll have conversations with my staff today, and they're, well, how come you know how to wire this motor or take this apart or read this, PLC diagram or something? It's like, because at the university feed mill, like quite a few, especially older independent mills, it's like there wasn't anybody to call, figure it out, figure out how to do it yourself. And I always really enjoyed that part, and I think I still do to this day. So it's fun to get to do a little bit of both, right?
Yeah, and I mean, one thing that I always tell everyone when I had the opportunity to visit feed mills is like, if you have a new employee, just provide some times to work with the maintenance guys, because at the end you don't want somebody like running the pellet mill or running like the mixing or the grinding system if they don't know where are those pieces, right, in the feed mill. I mean, if they can only see those pieces in the computer, we know that we have like sensors everywhere. If they know where that sensor is in the feed mill, and then there is a plug, they probably can go and fix it. So what you're saying about like, having that hands-on experience is always good.
Yeah.
Um, the,
I
the
was gonna
other
say, like taking, like trying to explain the internals of a pellet mill or a hammer mill without ever having actually taken one apart. It's like, well, I mean, if you haven't taken it apart yourself and had to put it back together, how well do you really understand it, kind of thing? And yeah, there's value. Sorry, interrupting you. Go ahead.
and the other thing that, like sometimes I think I tell my student, not my students, but like, when I talk with people, people is gonna typically say, "No, I don't like this." And sometimes you don't like it because you don't know how it works. And that applies to everything. It applies for math, applies for chemistry, applies for music. If you don't know how to do it, the easy excuse is I don't like it. So I have the feeling like as more people becomes more familiar with the feed industry, either like through online classes or through like this podcast, hopefully we are going to have more professionals in the feed industry in years to come.
Yep. No, yeah, I 100% agree. Going back to your comment about, other programs but also the idea of the feed mill as a cost. I got asked that question just yesterday, and someone asked me, okay, I was visiting a mill, and someone asked me, do you see when you go visit other facilities and you're talking with companies, are people coming around on the idea of investing more in the feed mill? And my answer was, look, it's not where I'd like it to be. It's not where I believe it should be. As you said, 70% of the cost. There are places not only to save money, but now there are places where if we spend more at the mill, there's more profit to be had over here by optimizing the system. And I think that's going to be a huge amount of what we do over the next decade or two is optimize. We already know how to grind feed, pellet feed, mixed feed. Okay, so now we've reached the point in this industry where it's time to optimize it, get every last minute out of the process, every last kilowatt out of the process. And I think there's a lot of technology that's going to go into that. I said, but it is changing. People are getting more, and companies are getting more invested. The ones that are the most forward thinking are getting more invested in it. And I mentioned what you said of also from 1950, whatever, when the feed science program was born at Kansas State University, until 2007, when the minor was started here at NC State, you went 50 years and there was only one feed milling program. And then you went another roughly 13 years and there were only two, one with a major degree and then the minor we have here at NC State. And each one of those have a slightly different goal of what we're trying to produce, the dedicated feed milling folks at K-State, and then folks that are going to be doing something in animal agriculture, and maybe it's in the feed mill, but even if it's not, we want them to understand what the feed mill does, right? And then over the last few years, we've heard more and more from other places saying, hey, we're going to build a new facility and we're interested in having more folks. And there's always a question, well, is there, is that competition, right? And, okay, to some extent, I suppose there's, yes, competition, and everyone's got an ego and things like that. But I also know that, there are a lot of folks retiring out of the industry, and we got to put new folks into the industry. And people like to live where they're used to. And so the chances of a student getting created on one side of the country and moving to the other, that happens, but it's not the rule, it's the exception to it. And so the fact that there's this interest in creating programs tells me, yeah, that means that there's enough industry coming and asking for a level of professionalism, a level of expertise that they're willing. We have gotten to the point where companies are starting to say, "Now we need to invest in this," and that's exciting. That's fun to be a part of.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, if you look, like, we got feed mills in the U.S. that make 1 million tons a year. Just let's multiply it by, like, let's say $500 per ton. That's $500 million just in ingredients that can go through a facility. So, like you're saying, I mean, having like the people prepared to run those facilities can help a lot with the efficiency.
Yep. And I think it goes, you being at Auburn in the poultry science department, and me being here at NC State in the poultry science department, it's what I said before too. I love when I get a student who's really interested in it and wants to be like in the feed mill proper. Like, this is, I want to be doing quality or production or whatever. I have a lot of folks through some of our other programs that we offer, like our certificate program that can be done online, but is basically the same coursework as the feed milling classes that our students that are doing the feed milling minor that have, as we go back to the very beginning conversation, have accidentally ended up into the feed industry. Maybe they're in maintenance somewhere and gone, you know what? I really like this. This is something I want to do, but I don't want to be the guy turning a wrench only forever. I think I'd like to be a supervisor and then someday a manager of a facility. And I think I could do that, but I need the continuing ed. And that's been great. And I've learned that along with just the idea of I can produce as many folks as, and I'd love to produce more. But if I produce nothing but, or if we as a whole group produce nothing but folks that manage feed mills, that's fine, but they're still going to be banging their head against the wall if the people above them don't understand. And so I get really proud of like the graduate students that we put out that go through the program. And so now they're sitting in somewhere in live production and nutrition and wherever they are. But I know that they know what the feed mill is, and they know what the feed mill can do, what the feed mill can't do, the kind of stresses it is. And so that conversation, I know the companies that have done that and then have hired those folks. And I've got the feedback that's our conversations between our mill managers and the people that they're making feed for are way better because that person up there knows, or the person selling the ingredients or doing R&D on the enzymes, actually understands how the pellet mill works and therefore can have a better conversation with the rest of the scientists about, we needed to be able to do this or that. I find that really, really gratifying.
Yeah, and I think, that's good because it helps out with the communication across the departments. And as I always say, the goal is not to find someone to blame. The goal is to find a solution so that problem doesn't repeat again.
Yep.
And that across training in nutrition, feed milling, live production, it helps a lot.
Yep. I agree. Well, this has been a good conversation. And as I mentioned, for everybody listening or watching, the plan moving forward is likely for I'll handle some interviews and some discussions with folks, more discussions than interviews, where we're going to really try to make these conversations that are interesting to you. I'll handle some and Wilmer will handle some, and we'll try to get you kind of a consistent flow of people that are coming from different places around feed science, kind of like what we just talked about. Hopefully some mill managers and some people that are doing equipment sales or building mills, but also some, nutritionists and other academics that are in this space and try to kind of bracket as much of the industry as we can. But, as I sit here, I think about it too. I think it's probably something we should plan on doing also to, every so often have a conversation, you and me, or maybe we bring in a couple other people too. And I think these would be fun ones to do from time to time also, right? As we kind of explore things as they evolve and what we're all seeing in the industry. I think those are some fun conversations potentially for people to listen to. So, but anyway, that's the plan. The plan is to try to give everybody a snapshot of kind of what goes on in the feed industry day to day from as many different perspectives as we can give it for those folks. Certainly the people in the industry. Hopefully you can find some entertaining and some stories in there and things you can relate to. But I'm also really hopeful that maybe I roll my own eyes at this, and I think about talking to my own wife, and I guess it's like, how can I make this so interesting that my family would be interested in learning about feed. But I'm hoping maybe we can figure out how to do that too, so that it's actually something that those people that, what is it that you do? This is something they could actually listen to and learn some about.
Thank you so much, Alan.
Yeah.
It's been a really good conversation.
Yeah. Thanks for joining me. And thanks everybody for listening, and more episodes, and hopefully quite a few episodes to come. With that, we'll end this conversation here and be back to you soon with more conversations from the world of feed science. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.